the paper that I'm presenting today is titled "When Teachers Take Notice of the Schoolscape: A Q Method Study of Teacher Perception of Schoolscape of Indigenous Tribal Minority Schools of Chhattisgarh, India." Now, so if for all of us who are like for the first time hearing the word Schoolscape, if you have walked into a school and you see signs like this, where you have four languages, like the one in the center which says Diwar, that's Hindi, Nette is supposed to be Halbi, Kuda is Gondi, and Wall is English. So if you walked into a school and you saw these colorful images of people and things or languages, and if you also happen to see these kinds of plaques where you have the Rashtriya Chin, the nationalism symbols, then you are actually looking at something called as the Schoolscape. So technically, Schoolscape is defined as any school-based environment where you see text, both written, graphic, oral, that form, that which begins to reproduce some kind of a language ideology that is already existent. Right, so you have entered into a world.
This is the linguistic landscape of the school, is it something?
Yes, but then we don't use the word the linguistic landscape of the school. When it comes to schools, we use the word schoolscape, sir. Very specifically to schoolscape. That's the reason why this definition comes in.
All right, fine.
So why would one be interested in looking at the schoolscape and more interested in looking at the schoolscape of a tribal child? And this is a tribal child in the district of Dantewada and the districts of Schoolscape, of Sukhma. While one reason is that if you begin to see the schoolscape as a deliberate goal-driven activity which is taken up by different actors, whether it is the teacher who decorates the schoolscape, or whether it is the policy maker, or whether it is the state, or whether it is the student himself, it is a deliberate activity. So if you're interested in looking at what drives people, then you should be interested in looking at the schoolscape. Similarly, the position from where I am coming is I'm looking at it more as a political ideology based intervention from the state, which then begins to become visible to you either as language policy made visible in the school and therefore an integral part of language management itself. So I'm coming from this position. But there are other positions. There are Professor Dasgupta, for instance, talks about it as this is the schoolscape is the space where the policy from the top and communities from the bottom begin to interact. So definitely this is in that sense it becomes a tool. The schoolscape becomes a tool through which you begin to shape constantly what you want to see and what you would want to see, what you want to and what you would want to. Which is why when political scientists like Sabatier and Weigel talk about advocacy coalitions, they definitely target certain state institutions such as courts, hospitals, and schools. So the schoolscape then becomes a tool through which you begin to study how advocacy groups itself begin to activate their ideologies. More importantly, this is...
Now your slide is not moving.
Slide is not moving, it is,
yes.
For me.
No, it's still stuck up with the first one.
Oh, why is it so? Can you now see the image?
No.
All right. Are we better if
it came.
This is better, right?
Yes, so, why examine the schoolscape of a tribal child? This is the one now.
This is the slide I was talking of, and you can already see that there are 5 reasons why one should seriously start looking at the schoolscape of a tribal child, and it's the second position that I'm coming from. But there are scholars like Professor Elena Shohomi and Tom Hubner who say that a schoolscape is not an ordinary place. It is a potential site for a struggle for visibility and space claiming. Visibility from the top is to visibilize the policy, from the bottom is to make place for what they believe is important. Therefore, when you walk into schools and you begin to see signs like this, especially this is a sign that I've collected from a tribal school. This is a tribal school meant, these are schools which are called as Pota Cabin schools. And this particular sign that you're looking at is right in the beginning of the school. And this is a Pota Cabin school exclusively meant for girls. But you begin to see boys only in the image. So
in Vedic times, something. It seems to be a Vedic Pathshala.
That's the view that, it will be very interesting when we start looking at how teachers see this as well, sir. So the questions that triggered me when I walked into this particular school was, what does the schoolscape of a tribal child look like to start with? And then how do teachers see the Schoolscape, and why do they see it the way they see it? Because I'm coming from a position where, I mean, an informed position where no policy is going to succeed unless teachers are on board. And you have literature coming from educational linguistics and translanguaging and multilingual education and a multilingual processing as well, very clearly saying that teachers are the frontline employees of a language policy. So if teachers see a language policy in a certain light, the way they would manipulate the classroom interactions is going to change. So if I am a teacher who believes that the language policy that comes in for the students in the Potakebin schools, tribal children of Gondi and Halbi families, communities, if I agree that the policy is fine, then there is a certain way in which my class would be transacted. And it would be the other way if I don't believe in that. So which is why when people say that teachers will follow a method, or which is why teachers will follow something, I have a strong view on that. Therefore, this particular study is focused on asking how do teachers see the Schoolscape and why do they see it the way they see it. In order to ask this kind of a question, it's clear that I can't do a questionnaire and get away with it. And if I do an interview, it's possible that I'm getting the most salient view that a teacher can have. When I say the most salient view, this is the most strongly imprinted view in my head, and that is what I would say. I wanted a methodology which would allow teachers to examine a range of opinions that can exist and then make their informed choice, because teaching is not instinctive, it is an informed choice. So when I looked in for a suitable methodology, I found a methodology which is called as a Q methodology. A Q methodology brings both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of looking at perceptions in a blended manner. They bring it together. The methodology brings the two together because it allows you to examine the different viewpoints that can be expressed on a particular topic. For instance, if for instance, a common understanding in linguistic landscape studies itself is that the linguistic landscape is a manifestation of the language policy. Fine, that's our opinion. There are other scholars who will now say that the linguistic landscape is a potential site for space claiming. So that becomes another opinion. So this methodology allows you to have as many opinions, I mean, as you can find in, let's say, the literature, the research literature, in newspapers. You can talk to different people and ask what they think. For instance, the principal of the teacher education college in Dantewada felt that linguistic, ye to kuch hoti nahi hai. This is nothing. Today you're saying, so I'm noticing. So that became an opinion. Schoolscape is something that exists, but people don't notice it. So that became an opinion. I'm just trying to get you to see that this methodology allows us to play with a whole range of options in the form of viewpoints. And then it also allows you to reflect on why you have placed it. Which is why the key component of Q methodology is to develop your Q concourse, which means a set of statements that are based largely on research as well as opinion, as well as published, as well as even newspaper components. We have one opinion which came in the newspaper which said that the Schoolscape of Potakebin schools is very beautiful. So we wrote that as an opinion, citing the newspaper article saying that Schoolscape is to make the place beautiful. So if you walked into a kindergarten, definitely it makes the place beautiful. But if you walked into my university at Nalsar, University of Law, the Vice Chancellor's office area is full of laurels. We have those cups and medals and all of that kept there. So that the Schoolscape is telling you certain things. It's just that we are not paying attention to it. So the Q course is something that comes out of your literature reading itself. Now, once the Q course is ready, you will then move it to make it in the form of a Q sorting cards, like the card that I'm having in my hand. This is a kind of sorts that we create. So you will have, like the Q concourse that we made, we have 35 statements. So we have 35 cards, which are then given to the teachers. What do teachers do then? They Q sort. So now each teacher would be given a grid like the one that you see, and they will be asked, you know, this card says something. Do you agree with it? Is it like your opinion or is it not like your opinion? Are you neutral about it? So they go on to sort. So what you're seeing in the image over here, you know, -4, under -4 you have 30 and 9. It means that statement 30, this particular teacher has put it under -4, which means that it is not at all strongly not at all like their opinion. A similar thing on the other end, you have statement 15, which is like where the teacher is saying, okay, this opinion, this statement is more like my opinion. So they Q sort. This is called Q sorting. Once the Q sort is done, then teachers are asked to, they're given the opportunity, like if you want to change something, if you want to add something, if you want to modify, rearrange, please go ahead and do that. Because once that is done and they say, I'm done, then you start your interviews where you ask, okay, explain what your sorting is. So they go on to say, in my opinion, this is what the Schoolscape is. This is not what the Schoolscape is. And on these matters, I'm neutral. And they give you a reason as to why they think so. Now, based on the Q sort, what you see over here, Q sort also gets you to see if there are in a school, let's say this data is collected from 6 schools. So we have a total of 51 teachers who consented to do this work. So you might want to ask, in this particular group of 51 teachers, are there teachers who are similar? So you can go on to do what is called as a principal componential factor analysis. Now the difference in the regular R analysis and the Q analysis is that you will have names of people on the rows and you will have your question statements on the columns. You invert it in Q. So you have your statements on the rows and you have your teachers in the columns. Now once you do a principal component analysis, you will begin to see how many teachers are coming together in a particular factor, which is why this is what the findings of my study are. You will see that, so how did teachers perceive the Schoolscape? Well, we have 38% of our teachers who perceived the Schoolscape for its pedagogic potential. So these are teachers who said, listen, we can use the Schoolscape in order to teach languages or to teach content subjects as well. For instance, we also had science teachers over there. So they were saying this can become a place for practicing. This can become a place for exhibiting what they have understood. But there were also teachers who went on to juxtapose and compare what is there with a non-tribal child schools environment and a tribal child school environment, which is again related to pedagogy, right? So 38% is a good number actually. 38% of the teachers believe that the Schoolscape has a pedagogic potential. Then comes 13% of the teachers who went on a critical mode and said, listen, what the Schoolscape is doing is it is reducing the complexity of the linguistic environment. They went on what I call as a reductive. They saw a reductive potential. Now the reason why they gave was they began to say, listen, here in this environment, every child comes with at least 4 languages. So the environment, you already have multilingual tribal children. In my own interaction with 4 classes, I saw that almost all, except for one child whose mother tongue was Chhattisgarhi, every other child knew Halbi, knew Gondi, knew Sarkujia in some cases, Dorli in some cases, Chhattisgarh. So they were acquiring Hindi in the school environment and English through that foreign language teaching approach as 4th and 5th languages. Not the first, not the second, not the third, but the 4th and the 5th in the sequence.
But they knew their Gondi.
Oh yes.
Oh,
they're all children who speak.
Because there are many cases of language loss in that area, otherwise reported, right? Yeah.
But I mean, at some point, maybe I'll bring that as well as. So you also begin to see that when teachers say this is reducing, what is it that it is reducing? The linguistic environment becomes concentrated on 2 languages for that matter. When the possibility of building multilingual capabilities has not been brought into that educational space as such. I'm aware of the fact that this is also a context where you have textbooks which 7 languages as glossaries. So you have a textbook in Hindi, you have the lesson in Hindi, and you have glossaries at the bottom in Gondi of Dantewada, Gondi of Jagdalpur, Gondi of Sukhma, Jahaldi, and you have them as glossaries. But when teachers do not know how to use them, the resource is wasted. The stronger opinion came when they were saying that this is indicative of an inequality in educational access, experience and educational opportunity for an ITM child. Well, one of the sound principles of education itself is to start from what the child knows. And mother tongue education there is ample research evidence to start with mathematics in mother tongue. But no, we have to start with mathematics in Hindi only, or in English only. So the child's comfort and the child's experience in the classroom is reduced in that sense. And these are teachers' opinions, not mine. I mean, I was myself as a researcher sometimes, a little perplexed about what my study is showing me. 9% of the teachers actually said that there is a homogenizing potential that this particular component of Schoolscape has. They are actually saying that when you use the word homogenize, you're actually saying that all diversity is now going to be clipped out. That we want people to study, but then study only in Hindi. So the homogenizing effect over here seems to be coming from the recognition that the teachers have towards what they call as a monolingual ambience. That the child might come from different languages, but when once in school, it is this language and this languaging environment only that has to be, enabled. This is the last part where, and this is a view that comes predominantly from, something that I did not tell you is that the teachers over here, we had 25 teachers out of 51 who were speakers of Halbi, Gondi, Chhattisgarhi themselves, and which means they were Hindi speaking, trained in B.Ed and all of that as mother tongues. They were Hindi speaking, but they also were people who knew Gondi and Halbi, Sarkujia, Dorli. 2 teachers knew Dorli as well. It was coming predominantly from those teachers who knew the language of the child as well, that there is a silencing potential in the Schoolscape, because in one sense the Schoolscape begins to project what the state is doing. So all those big images of the chief minister and the prime minister talking about learning achievement and how learning poverty is being taken care of vis-a-vis the minimum learning outcomes, all of that, if somebody was to read, I mean, if there were parents who were educated or at least literate in Hindi, and if they were to read, in that sense, they were saying that when parents see all of this, they think that something big and phenomenal is happening with the child here, and therefore, it's definitely possible that it can silence. And because it also happens to be in a certain geopolitical space of our country, there were a couple of teachers who pointed out that it is when these kinds of images are put out that even the media goes on a silencing mode, on a silent mode. So these are the 4 components that my data is showing, and I've exactly about 15 minutes I've completed, thinking that I would have some time available for questions if there's somebody who would be interested in asking or want to know something more.
Yeah, I'm really happy with your presentation. I mean, I think this is what I'm making a preliminary comment, because you see the new education policy, I'm no great fan of the present regime anyway, but let me say this, the fact that, the new education policy, there is one little statement talking about we should go into making profiles of each school, see. So that means the value of case studies is enhanced. So, in some ways, all of you have done justice to that idea. The one who was talking about the case study of the higher education enrollment, that was a case study. Other person has picked up the case study in a certain environment of teaching of English. And then you brought in the case of studies of multilingualism in Odisha and something, and you're not taking up a specific school and all that. Each of them have collectively helped me to think about, the issues that are at stake in education, the domain of education, whether it's higher or a pre-primary or and all that. Because even when he was making out a case for higher education, he was wanting to correlate it with what had happened at the primary level and earlier levels and bring it. So the whole collectiveness of it all, is very important. And I'm glad that the struggle for justice and for linguistic disparity to be set aside and everybody getting a good chance. Because to my mind, the very idea that we are a multilingual country and yet we keep thinking of English medium or Hindi medium or mother tongue medium. If you're a multilingual society and you value multilingualism, then you should think of the same school being multilingual in media. There should be more than one medium in each school. In fact, the whole system is flawed in thinking there ought to be only one of them should be privileged as the medium. Whereas that means in all senses, all schools undermine the potentials that are obtaining in the settings out there.
In that sense,
they all undermine multilingualism in their own ways. And they promote one over the other. They create a hierarchy of sorts in your minds. that one is to be preferred. I think whereas the whole idea of is to create a sense of balance between them, work out a harmonious multilingual society in which we seek the liberation of one and all. It's not, and the hold that English has over thinking, that needs to be set aside. I mean, the hegemony that works on its way into our thinking, that needs to be combated, and you need to struggle with that. And perhaps the hegemony works with the larger languages or the smaller languages, the minor languages and all that. So there's a whole huge exercise at stake in our minds that once we do it. But I would like the audience in general to react to the very interesting presentations and have something to say, because I think we have something to gain from this very interesting little session that we have had.
You did mention in the midst of my presentation about the law as such, no?
Yeah.
So what was that, sir? What was that comment about? Like, maybe you could explain that. And were you referring to the fact that because Dantewada, Sukhma, Baluda Bazar, and those areas.
Yeah. So those are the areas in which I said there's among the Gondi people. You see, if you look into the figure of Gondi speakers in this country and Gondi tribe on the other hand, you'll realize that 80% of the Gondi tribes don't speak Gondi any longer. So there's a huge amount of language loss among the Gondi tribes. Many of them have begun to speak Halbi or something else out there. So we have already, and it's not an act of volition that has happened.
No, it's not.
It's a gradual takeover. It's a gradual sense of, being dispossessed of your languages.
Language, true.
And it has worked into a whole set of factors at play. The demography of those areas has changed. The institutional arrangements that are there have been set aside. Gondi is not privileged in any sense, it's there. And there are few remarkable things like the Gondi the radio station that was put up by some people and that started working very well for people to read. And these are trouble spots in India, all the Naxalite belts that are running and all that we have had. So it means the hearts and minds of the people have not been attended to in earnestness. We have not done justice to our own fellow citizens of this mother country. We have not done enough for each other. We have not sought to be equal to each other.
Thank you, ma'am. I was so engrossed in your discussion, and I mean, I completely agree with sir that we are not celebrating our multilingualism enough and things like that. But at the same time, what really disturbs me is that after listening to these, even after agreeing, I don't have, as a language teacher, as a linguist, I don't have a practicable solution to this. I mean, to say that we need to bring out and we need to respect all the languages is okay, but what can be done, like an immediate step? Do you have a solution? That's my question.
May I attempt, so?
Just like a next step, not a wholesome solution that could change the system.
May I attempt, sir?
Yeah. See, for instance, I made a suggestion that in a multilingual country, we should abandon the idea of monolingual medium schools. We should make a recommendation that we will not allow for any school to say I'll be only Gujarati medium or only Hindi medium or only English medium. To my mind, each of those, they may be very pragmatic and needed but to each one of them sort of sets aside something else about the school, So each school must become multilingual in its intake and output. If I want to be in a Kannada medium school and still want to appear in English in my subjects, I should be given the chance to do that.
But then, what do you mean? Then, sir,
but if I go to an English medium school, I should want to appear my exams in Hindi, I should have that option.
Prachi, may I attempt this question?
Yeah.
Sure. I just have a follow-up question on what sir said, that would also entail a training of teachers also in all the separate languages.
I'm saying that
that's exactly my point, right? When I started my presentation, so that's what I was saying, that no policy, especially which is bent, like one of the points that the new education policy does, is to recognize that there's something called as learning poverty. None of the NEPs I have a problem with the NEP, but that doesn't mean I will not recognize what is good in it. It recognizes that there is something called as a learning poverty, which is why from page 6 to page 13 of NEP, which says the principles of sound language, sound education, there is a mention of skills not being uniform, and then there is a need for strategizing skill development. Now go and take a look at what they mean by learning poverty as such. If you take that as one part and then ask, why is it that we are not in a position to create linguistically sensitive pedagogic practices? I mean, that's what I'm narrowing your question to. We have so many languages. We really don't need to have all those languages in our classroom. The languages that exist in your classroom, how can you encourage the child to think? Is the question. I mean, I've had a supervisor, my PhD work, I had a supervisor who would say, Uma, if you have two languages in your head, you are diversity. You don't need two people to say that this is diverse. You have two languages, you're already diverse.
You are the locus of contact of the languages. That's what.
That's it. So how will you enable different languages? Ask for bilingual text to be prepared. No, if you are teaching in a school system, or if you are teaching in a college system like me, I encourage my students to write in their local language. Like I teach law students, and I say that a lot of legal awareness is not happening because it is all in English and Hindi. Can we have those 2-minute videos in YouTube where you will explain a particular law in a language that the people will understand?
Right.
Nothing beyond that.
Today is also Ramakant Agnihotri's birthday. Ramakant, who's the man who's been championing multilinguality and all that. We are all working together on this cause of multilingualism to be strengthened in this country and to actually move towards a more harmonious. We have sometimes disruptive multilingualism, sometimes we have hegemony of one over the other, and we have all kinds of issues. We have an overtly multilingual country with many things, but we also have deep structural flaws in the way the multilingualism is not made accessible in equal terms to all, and there are all issues of disparity. So diversity is something that we all value, but disparity is something that needs to be set aside and worked against. So each school, each setting, each community has a chance to participate in its own liberation, and in doing so, it will liberate be fighting the battle for a larger cause. So I would like to thank all of you. I think this is just a small little forum. We got attention, and I'm very glad that all the participants have put forth their views, and we have brought out the nature of the different settings. I was even depressed by the idea that in all the higher education, the English medium people were getting to hog more of the seats in that university in Bihar. But that was the fact that he was bringing out with his 380 odd students that he had interviewed in Broader Sarosh when the first became. We were also talking about the different methods you can be. I was worried about the methods, how we collected the data on the methodology, and just because there are methods in theory about grammar translation and all that, I don't think anybody really, like you said, practices a method so quickly. People are more task-centered and getting around to do it. And they can't undo their own ways of having acquired a certain language. They are always fighting against that. So anyway, this is a space for creativity. There's huge scope for creative impulse to set forth, and we must allow ourselves to become more activist. I think for linguistics to be even worthwhile, it must be fighting for the justice for all languages and seeking a sense of more egalitarian kind of a thing, a more harmonious society. And there are deep-rooted conflicts, biases, unrest all over, and we need to stare at that and acknowledge the woes that prevail in our society, and then lend ourselves in our best ways to become soldiers on the front to wage battle against for the sake of the dignity and all. Thank you so much, all of you being here, and I really appreciate everybody's endeavor. Thank you so much to CIIL and the organizers for giving us an opportunity to come together on this matter. Thank you so much.